All right, class, this is the first video for contracts, chapter 1. We'll try and move through the material relatively quick. Just a reminder for upcoming due dates. January 25th, which is 1 week from today, there will be a discussion release on the website, as well as quiz 1 will be released. You have 7 days. That has to be turned in by midnight of February 2nd. Even if the quiz says 7 p.m., the turn-in date that I set on the online will be midnight. So if I don't have it by that time, the system automatically cuts it off. Chapter 1 is essentially just an introduction into a ton of different contract principles. The main takeaways from the chapter are, first is what constitutes a contract, and this is something that you're going to need to know for the duration of the class, is that for a contract formation, there's only 3 elements: an offer, an acceptance, and consideration, which is the value or detriment received for entering into the contract. That's what consideration is. The next 3 chapters, chapter 2, 3, and 4, go through offer, acceptance, and consideration in great detail. But for purposes of today, it's simply an offer is the offer of the terms, the acceptance is I accept, and consideration is the value or detriment. There are 2 general types of contracts. There are unilateral contracts and bilateral contracts. You need to make sure that you read not only the snippets in the book, but the larger discussion on those. Unilateral contract is a promise for performance. There is no counter promise for a unilateral contract. One of the easiest ways to construe a unilateral contract is, for example, when you go and get gas. The gas station offers gas at, I don't know what the price is right now, $2.25. And you can either choose to pay at the pump and get the gas at that price or not. That's where we go to McDonald's and you get a 99-cent fry or however much there are. That's the unilateral contract. A bilateral contract is 2 parties that have mutual performance obligations. That's something very much like a mechanic, where you negotiate prices, your cell phone bill, somebody that you hire to paint your house or redo your driveway, where there's 2 parties for performance or detriment. You're going to need to know unilateral and bilateral contracts. You can have, most people think that contracts must be in writing in order to be enforceable. You will find in this class under the statute of frauds that there are certain contracts that need to be in writing. That will come at a later time, but what you need to know for today is that contracts do not have to be in writing unless they fall under the statute of frauds in order to be enforceable. For example, if I promise to buy a water from each one of you every time that we meet for $1, at exactly 7:30 p.m. on the Wednesdays that we meet, that does not have to be in writing in order for it to be enforceable. Common sense says that if you really want a contract to be enforceable, put it in writing, but it does not have to be in writing in order to be enforceable. So oral contracts can be enforceable. There are also void contracts and voidable contracts. A void contract is one that is void, what's called ab initio, at its inception. It can never be enforceable. For example, a contract to marry your sister or brother by statute is void as a matter of law. Somebody who is incompetent to contract, they've had that right taken away from them, that is void as well. One of the main areas that we see are voidable contracts. That has to deal with age or other type of incompetencies. For example, if somebody contracts with a 17-year-old, for example, a gym, Planet Fitness or whatever, and they sign a contract with a 17-year-old, and the 17-year-old says, wait a minute, I am too young to contract, then the 17-year-old can then void that contract. It's voidable at the 17-year-old's discretion. If the 17-year-old wants Planet Fitness to stick by its contract, then Planet Fitness would be bound by it. That's what makes it voidable, is it's voidable at the election of the party that was not competent to testify. Other areas of incompetency can include temporary incompetency, for example, One's intoxicated, if they can prove that they were too intoxicated to make a competent decision, perhaps 1 or 2 beers, maybe not, 15 shots, and they just sold their house when they could barely stand up, probably have some competency issues, and that may be voidable. Specifically, if the drunk person wants to stick by the deal, they're probably stuck. If the sober person wants to, and the drunk person says, "I wasn't competent to testify," then that may be voidable. Contracts also to accept. Another important area is if I offer, hand you a written contract that says I offer to paint your door for $100, please let me know by the last day of January 2017, and you send me an email saying I accept your offer. That's a valid acceptance, even though it's not written on the contract. There are 2 sources of contract law. There's common law, which is judge-made law. Those are most of your service contracts, your consumer-to-consumer contracts. Most of the contracts that we're familiar with are the result of hundreds and thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of years, hundreds of years of contract law that judges make. That's judge-made law, is what's called common law. Those laws were relatively strict as they dealt with offer acceptance and consideration, and so there was a committee nationwide that adopted what's called the Uniform Commercial Code. Those apply to merchants, between merchants and consumers. So if Walmart is buying phones from Apple, that's a merchant-to-merchant transaction. Those would fall under the Uniform Commercial Code. There are certain merchant-to-consumer UCC provisions, that's the short form of Uniform Commercial Code, that we're going to actually spend a significant amount of time on in each chapter. But, for example, if you go buy an iPhone from Walmart and it's over a certain price, that would also fall under the Uniform Commercial Code. There's certain different provisions that aren't essential for today that we will talk about, but they're really to kind of allow commerce to progress, because common law is too strict in how it handles its business, and it allows a little bit more flexibility in the terms and provisions of a contract. The common law was pretty strict on those issues. Some other things to think of is we're going to run into some choice of law provisions when you hit chapter 11 and onward. There's jurisdictional clauses and venue clauses. Jurisdiction, by contract, you can choose the jurisdiction that will hear disputes in your contract. For example, you can write in there that any disputes related to this contract shall be litigated in the 6th Judicial Circuit in and for Pasco County, to the exclusion of all other jurisdictions. But you can also put in that same contract that the contract shall be construed according to the laws of Alaska or Delaware, whatever you want to contract in. So you can write those provisions in there. There's 2 major components to this class. The first one is contract formation. Again, formation is offer acceptance consideration, and then there's the breach and performance issues. One of the things to consider for contract formation is that the terms of the contract have to be concise. This is one of the first areas that you'll see in gratuitous contracts in chapter 1, which is, if I say, hey, I'd love to cook you dinner next week, I'll bring over some lasagna on sometime next week, hope you enjoy it, and then next week comes and I don't bring any lasagna over, you don't really have a contract formed, because there isn't specificity in price, performance, quantity, or anything like that. It's the same kind of thing as, your neighbor says, yeah, sure, I'll help you clean your pool, doesn't bother to do it. Now, if that same neighbor says, look, I'll clean your pool next Tuesday at 11 o'clock, it'll be, all the pH balances will work, and you owe me $100 for it, and you say okay, even if that's oral, that's going to be a formation of a contract. The difference is one where your neighbor says, sure, I'll help you. The other one is, this is your obligations, these are my obligations. Those are the major points for chapter 1. There will be a quiz. I can expand on any of these points via email or a subsequent video. Usually there's a lot of questions and answers, so feel free. Remember, the email address is jts@simonslawfirm.com. Simons is spelled with 1 M. I'll get a feel for how long these videos are going to take. I would like to keep them under right around 10 minutes where we are now, and any feedback on the videos on what's going to make them more effective would be helpful.